Hello everyone, my name is Mina Dimitriou. I'm the project manager for this initiative, the National Women in Transport Initiative, and I'm very pleased to be your MC today. Before we commence, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, and I pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. Just some housekeeping today. If you could please all put your phones on silent, that would be greatly appreciated. The emergency exit just behind me, and then the bathrooms are just at the back to the left if you need them. So I've been working on this initiative since launch, along with a lot of other people in this room, so I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you so much for being here during such a busy time at the end of the year. I know you've all made a great effort. A lot of you have travelled to be here today, so we really appreciate it. So as this is a networking event, hopefully you will be able to meet some people you haven't met before. Would like to ask you to turn to the person next to you, ask them what they're really excited about for next year as we are getting towards the end of the year. Excited. Sorry to cut you off. Thanks, Romilly. So to give our introduction for this discussion, I would like to introduce Carolyn Walsh. Carolyn is the chair of the National Transport Commission and a member of our Speaker Bureau. She is well known in Australia's transport sector and has over 35 years' experience in Commonwealth and New South Wales public services, focused on industry, science and transport issues. Please welcome Carolyn.
Hello everybody, good morning and welcome, and really thankful that you're all here. So welcome to this lunchtime event with our special guest, Elizabeth Broderick AO, and I'll have more to say about Elizabeth in a few minutes. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. This is a celebration of the National Women in Transport Initiative, and it's a wonderful initiative that was endorsed by Transport Ministers. It's actually been funded and supported by Transport Ministers and governments, and it's an initiative working in partnership with industry to actually really promote the visibility of women in our sector. You know, it is a sector where it has been traditionally a male-dominated sector. We all know that. At Ausrail last week, Caroline, it was well noted that the sector is now made up of 24% women, which is terrific, and that includes at leadership levels in certain parts of the industry, which is fantastic, but obviously there's a long way to go. So the Transport and Women's Initiative is really about helping to raise that profile of women so that as younger people come through, younger women come through, and I can see a few around us today, they've actually got something to aspire to see that they're part of this team. They're not something different to this team, they're part of the transport family. So it was launched in March 2022, so we've only been going for about 18 months or so, and the team, Minna and the team, have just done an absolutely fantastic job. We've got a strong online presence, and we have had a number of initiatives that have been co-hosted with industry around the country to promote women in transport. I went to the ARA's one, Caroline, earlier this year, that the ARA hosted. A flagship initiative of this work is our Speakers Bureau. And this is a very tangible thing beyond just networking and all that sort of stuff that this initiative is actually doing by creating and maintaining a database of women around our sector who are available to speak at conferences, be on panels, you know, just be out there to promote our industry and promote women in our industry. You know, it's now a well-worn cliche about you can't be what you can't see. And so it's great that we've got women who are prepared to do that. It also means that there's no longer any excuse for people to say, oh, we couldn't find a woman. There wasn't a woman with the skills we needed. So when we first launched the Bureau, we had 17 profiles of women, including my own. I'm really pleased that we're now up to 60 because we're increasing the gene pool and it's a lot better these days. So it's great to have 60 women who are on that database. So I just want to give you one, I was asked to do at least one thing about my own story, so I'll just give you one anecdote. It does go back to the Jurassic period of the 1980s, but I think it still does have relevance today, and I'll try and do it reasonably quickly, because it's a bit of a long... I can make it a shaggy dog story that can go on for hours. So I'm a 26, 27-year-old, so I've just given away my age, in the late 1980s, and I'm an assistant director with the Steel Industry Authority at the Commonwealth Government. And we were giving money hand over fist to BHP to stop them from, you know, leaving the country and still making steel in Australia. And I'm a fairly junior person, and I'm supporting the commissioners of the Steel Industry Authority. It was agreed that the authority would go down and meet the board and CEO of BHP down in Melbourne. So I had my 3 commissioners, my boss Gary, and we went down there with them. And there was a young bloke in BHP about my age and my my level, who was doing the logistics in the organisation for his CEO and the board. I'm, of course, the only woman in amongst this group of people. This young bloke in BHP was quite ambitious, and he thought it'd be really, really clever to take the board and his CEO to his private club. No, I'm dead set serious. The Savage Club in Melbourne. Now, this not only was a male-only member club, there were no women allowed in at all, not even as guests. Sorry, unless you are the servants of the gentlemen who are dining and wining in the said club. So as we're all heading into the Savage Club for lunch, I'm at the tail, as the underlings tend to be, along with the other young bloke from BHP and my boss Gary. And we're sort of like corralled by staff who sort of separate us from the bigwigs who go off into the bar. And I immediately got it. I thought, are you allowed to... Oh, no, I'm being filmed, I won't swear. I think, right. And I'm 27, right? And Gary, my boss, is looking really confused. What's going on here? And I said, oh, Gary, I think this is a men's club and I'm not allowed in here, so I won't be able to join you for lunch. And your men in change, Liz, your men in change. This is in the late 80s. He could have said, oh, see you at the 2:30, bye, and then gone into the bar with the blokes. He could have done that, and he did not. He stood up, and he wasn't a particularly big or bolshy bloke. He just said, well, that's not right. That's not right. Carolyn's coming. You know, she's done all the work for this. She's coming. And so the managers came down, and they sort of worked out that rather than having drinks in the bar to begin with, they'd go straight to the private room where we were having lunch, where I could not be seen. And while the blokes went up the main staircase to the... and they had to go into the bar and say, change of plans. So this is what Gary had done, which is terrific and brave of him. Doesn't sound brave, but it was in the time. He went in and he told the chair of BHP and his 3 commissioners that we're going to circumvent drinks, we'll have them in the private dining room and we'll see you up there in a couple of minutes, right? I was shuffled up the back staircase through the servants, and I tell you, that's what they called it. I went up through the servants' entrance to the private dining room so that I could not be seen. On the way up, I was feeling a mixture of fury, hopelessness and helplessness, unworthiness, you know. And then I'm thinking the best thing to do would be just run back down the stairs, hightail it out of there and go to the 2:30 meeting and not have to deal with this. And then my second thought was my really, really, really feminist friends in Canberra will kill me if I'm such a gutless wonder. So I thought, OK, I'm going to have to go. Then what do? My feminist friends in Canberra are going to think I need to wave a flag. So I'll have to go up there and make a statement. What does that look like? How dare you, do this? So I'm flushed and I'm going into this room. Anyway, I just decided there and then, and this is my message that stuck with me for the rest of my life, is I've got a right to be in that room and I've got a right to have a voice in that room, and I'm going to stay there. And because my 2 options walking up is I thought I could do the feminist rant and storm out in protest. And you know what would happen? Oh, she's a bit weird, and now we're the only blokes in the room. That's all that would have happened. So I thought, I'm going to stay there because I need to be a voice in the room. I need to be a woman in that room. And then as the lunch went on, I sort of had this, and I settled down. I sort of had this joyful thought. I don't need to wave a flag, and be the histrionic woman in front of the board members, but God, I could make that young bloke's life a misery for the next half an hour or more. So he's sitting next to me, and whenever the courses came around, the chair of BHP would go, marvellous soup, marvellous soup. And I just lean over to him and say, pity only half the country can enjoy it. And then as a staffer bringing around membership forms, because of course this is all promoting the men's club to the BHP board, and the chair saying, oh, here's it's not for the likes of me. It was just great fun, because this young man had no idea whether I was going to blow his cover and really cause a stink at this thing that he had shown off about. I only did that, but I hope he had indigestion for the next month. That's all I can say. So my story is, with that's really important, is a man stood up for me. And I think without that, I would have just slunk off in those days. So men in this world are really, really important in actually doing the right thing and seeing the right thing. And back in those days, that wasn't that clear. It wasn't that clear-eyed then that was wrong to exclude me from that place. It wasn't that clear, but my boss stood up for it and said that wasn't right. Secondly, as I say, I did have a right to be in the room. I did have a voice. And over the last 30 years, during my, oh God, it's 40 years now, to be honest. Over the last 40 years of my career, in male-dominated worlds, and including in transport, as I've seen more women come into the sector, as I've seen more diversity in terms of age, culture, ethnicity, background, do you know what you see? You see deeper discussions, better decision making. You see innovation. You know, you see an enthusiasm that is not just all sameness and groupthink. So it's not only our right, it's actually in the interest of the community and in the interest of our economy to have as diverse a group of people at the table having a voice at the front line, in the offices and in the boardrooms around the country. Now, that brings me to Liz Broderick, who has been a champion of this her whole life. And so I know Liz, everybody around the room here will know this, but I'm going to actually just mention a few things. So firstly, Liz is a lawyer by training, and somehow as a lawyer, she ends up in 2001 as a Telstra Businesswoman of the Year. True? True, okay, good, so far. Okay, she was the longest-serving Sex Discrimination Commissioner with the Australian Human Rights Commission from 2007 to 2015, which is where I met Liz. At that time, my partner had just got onto the commission as the National Children's Commissioner and had a short overlap with Liz's reign, so I had the wonderful opportunity to meet Liz and her family during that time. As the sex discrimination Liz did, and very high-profile work that you'd all be aware of, unless you were living under a rock, about Male Champions for Change, which is now just Champions of Change. She did the review of the Defence Force, which was all over the media at the time as this amazing thing to take such a male bastion industry and really look at it at a roots and, branch and roots, belts and braces way to actually make sure that it could change its culture, and also did a whole lot of other stuff in terms of research and policy work in women's rights. She then, after she finished there, became the UN Rapporteur for discrimination against women and girls and held that position until just a couple of weeks ago, where she stepped down after 6 years of doing that very difficult work across the globe. Now, where am I up to? I'm trying to do this in order. We've done that, because there's a lot of it. Yeah. Then she's now chair of the Gender and Disaster Australia Experts Advisory Committee and a member of the Global Institute for Women's Leadership Advisory Council at King's College. And for those of you who aren't, do become a follower of Julia Gillard's podcast, a podcast of one's own. It's fabulous. And Liz is on her advisory board at King's College, which is really exciting. Liz is also, of course, with her own business, a principal of EB & Co Consultancy, which provides consultancy services on strategic thinking and transformation of businesses, particularly around culture and gender diversity. Now, that's what I do know to be true. I also did some fun Google facts. I think I've got a minute to do the fun Google facts. So, you were working at Blake Dawson Waldron in your younger years, and my understanding is you were the first partner of Blake Dawson Waldron to go part-time. Fun fact, isn't that good? Blazing the way. Makes such a difference in terms of not only women, but in the future, as we see now, more men are taking advantage of part-time work and looking after kids. Second fun fact, I've only got two, is, and this is where I want to do a bit of a fact check as well, you were the head girl at Merredin in Strathfield in your final year. You've got a twin sister, identical, Jane. For some reason, and I suspect it's because you two were quite competitive and wanted to come first at anything and you couldn't if you went to the same school, she went to... Is that right? Yep,
Different
okay.
schools. They're doing amazing.
I thought, how could these two girls, these two twin sisters, go to the same school and one of them would have to come second in something? Okay. So, Jane was the head girl at MLC Burwood while her sister's the head girl at... and you just got to go, you just know these girls are going to rock and rock the world, don't you? You just know. So, Liz will be joined for our fireside chat for the next half an hour or so with the wonderful Romilly Maju, who's the CEO of Engineers Australia, and a great friend of the National Women in Transport Initiative. It was in fact Romilly and Jill Miles, the former CEO of the National Transport Commission, who worked really tirelessly to get this idea going and worked up. So thank you, Romilly, and the work that you've been doing there. So with no further ado, I would just like you all to give a really, really warm welcome to both Romilly and Liz.
Thank you. It's lovely being here, everyone. And before I start and we do the in conversation, I just wanted to talk about Liz's impact on my career. Many people look at me and have said, you know, how did you get to where you got to in your career? And I got to my roles because within a community and within a family of women and men who have supported me over many years. But Liz was amazing, and I met her years and years and years ago. She's a member of Chief Executive Women, but she instills a number of attributes that I think are really, really important. One is, you know, obviously leadership and advocacy, but also grace and authenticity. And she always has time to speak to speak to you. And I remember when I was just a baby executive, you know, I got to have some great time with Liz when we helped set up Champions of Change Property, the Property Council. And it was Ming Long and I sat down with Liz. And when she tells you to do something, you do it. It's very much... Peter Verwer, for those of you who know, can be quite scary. Peter Verwer and Liz in a room was hysterical because he was very much, we're going to do this, and she's like, I don't think so. But why I'm saying all that is I think it's incredibly important when we see the numbers in Australia. We need more female leaders to be visible. And when you're visible, it's really important you just don't pull up the ladder, you throw out the net. You grab as many women and men as you can, and you make sure that you help them and guide them like Liz has helped many of us. And the reason I say men and women, I'm just going to embarrass someone very quickly. Adam Kopp, who's the CEO of Infrastructure Australia, is here. And IA was the first government organisation to do parental leave, not for men or women, but for everyone. And it was equal across, and there was no primary or secondary. And I didn't lead that as CEO at the time. Adam was COO, he led it. He wrote the report, he got the board to agree to it, he took it to the government, he got the government to agree to it, and IA was the first, and we use IA as a case study. So which is what really important in your roles, that you throw out the net to as many people as you can. So Carolyn talked about Liz has just retired in her role as UN Rapporteur. And so we might start with that and your observations on what's happening globally at the moment. Geopolitics is the term that I would have thought 2 years ago we wouldn't have been using, but geopolitical risks and threats is really at the forefront. So what are you seeing coming through?
Thanks very much, Rom, and thanks for your beautiful remarks, and also for Carolyn as well. When you're talking about grace, I thought, oh my God, I fell on the way to here, so I'm not very graceful on my legs, that's for sure. But yeah, it's just so beautiful, and it's beautiful to be connected to a group of women who are so, as you say, throwing out the net for everyone else. Because I think, coming back to your question then, Rom, is we are in a particular moment. So my role at the United Nations, I came together with 4 other special rapporteurs. We led all the UN's country missions into different countries to look at the status of women and girls and to make recommendations on how to lift that status. But we also wrote every couple of days to the heads of nation states, drawing to their attention human rights violations against women and girls in their particular country. And I have to tell you, in this moment, we're seeing a major pushback on the rights of women and girls, and particularly the LGBTIQ community as well. I mean, just to give you some sense of that, we've recently done a country mission into Afghanistan. I can't tell you how dire the situation is. And when I look at what's happening there, it comes from a playbook that others are replicating. So we start by controlling your body. We control what you wear. We control when you can leave the house and when you can't. I mean, Afghanistan's extreme on education. So after the age of 8, girls are not offered any form of education. And then increasingly, we've seen the edicts from the Supreme Emir down to shutting down beauty parlours, because that's places where women congregate, and share information. And what we're seeing, you can say, well, that's Afghanistan, but if it is contagion impact in the air, if we look at what's happening in Iran with the Women Life Freedom campaign, which is so incredible to see those women coming out, and I'd say that in Afghanistan as well. It's the women's rights movement, the feminist movement in those countries that gives me so much hope. But if you take it across to the US, we're seeing a real pushback on women's reproductive rights. I mean, in half the states of the US, abortion is not a possibility. So, women can't elect around their reproductive rights. And then you bring it down here into our region. I mean, Indonesia's just introduced their criminal code, which criminalises any intimate behaviour prior to marriage, which will have disproportionate impact on LGBTIQ and also women. But even, I was looking last week in Sri Lanka, they now have a law before the parliament which says that women no longer have to sign their own marriage certificates. Their male guardian can sign it on their behalf. So, these are the types of pushbacks that we're talking about in this planetary moment. So if you were ever sitting on the fence about gender equality, this is your moment to step forward, because there's so many of us who care deeply about what is essentially our human rights. As you were saying, Carolyn, in that men's only club, you have a right to be there, you have a right to speak. These come from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but in this moment we're seeing those rights systematically undermined. And I think every one of us, and I couldn't agree more, men, women, people of all genders, to come together and support this agenda around gender equality.
Bringing it back to locally, are you seeing a change in Australia? I know that there's been some commentary following the referendum and that that very strong conservatism that came through, and that there is concern that the coalition may use that in other areas as well, not just what was happening with The Voice. Are you seeing that in Australia, or is it?
Yeah.
Or is it being managed?
Well, over the last 12 months, I think Australia's been running counter-cyclical to the rest of the world. I mean, we've seen some really progressive legislation shifts. So the positive duty to prevent sexual harassment, sex discrimination, that is a game changer. I mean, so that came in the Sex Discrimination Act. We've seen the pay transparency. That will be an absolute game changer, because we know transparency drives progress. But look at the issues around violence against women in our own country. We don't have to go to Afghanistan to look at that. I mean, 2 weeks ago, in 10 days, 5 women were murdered by an intimate partner, either a former partner or current partner. So these issues are happening right here in our own country. The gender pay gap still exists, all those things. Unless we do step up intentionally, I worry that not only will we not make progress, given the current global situation and the rise of religious fundamentalism, many, many more autocratic regimes. I mean, for those of you who've been following it, what happened in Argentina overnight, what we'll see is a regression which will have ramifications in a country like Australia. And I mean, I follow what's happening across democracy generally across the world, but the Freedom Index, which measures demographic nations, is in free fall. And if you're a mature democracy like Australia, we're almost an endangered species at this point. So that's another reason we really need to step up.
So you used a word there, and just so you know, the Q&A's just gone right out the window. We had some questions, just going to put them there, just going to ignore them. You used the word intentionally. What can we, as those in the room, intentionally do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it starts back in the family. Like when I go on country mission, I'm not looking, I do look at the personal laws and things, but I'm looking in the family. I'm also looking whether women are kicking the footy and whatever. They're those types of things. So it starts in the family. How do you divide up work? Do you model respect for your, because that's what your children will take into their, to their later lives. So I think it starts there. It also starts with an interrogation of self. So, when you go into the workplace, we do a lot of deep dives looking at culture, how we can embed everyday respect in big global organisations. And people always like to say, oh, well, that person there's a bully, or he sexually harasses, or whatever, rather than starting right here. How do I walk in this organisation? And we usually do that on 4 dimensions. What do I say? How do I act? what do I prioritise and what do I measure? So it's worth seeing what your own leadership shadow is. When I see, someone make a demeaning, statement about a woman, or, just to give you an example, you go into work on Monday morning, you've had a great weekend, your boss says to you, how was your weekend? You said, well, it was fantastic, we did this, and I went with the kids and did that. And he said, well, did you get any? So that's the type of thing. It's those micro moments. That's what we have to stand up against. And actually, I've seen some really good work that's happening in some organisations. Komatsu, I'd like to call out, because they have their say it again strategy. So when that man says that to me, I say, oh, could you say that again? So it's a very non-personalised, non-emotional, but just a request. And because everyone in the organisation knows they've been onboarded or they've been educated, which we have a common language here. If someone's crossing that boundary, we ask them, oh, can you just say that again? So I think, doing those types of things, and then, supporting each other. And helping to educate those who just think, well, sorry, this is all finished business. Because I don't know if you saw, was it Anne Rose or someone put out their survey just recently, the Gender Compass, I think it was, and it said that 29% of people in Australia think that gender equality is finished business. That's a third of us. So, hello, we're back to kind of talking very loving ways about why it's not. So there's some things.
So I'll just pick up on that. So I'm actually on Champions of Change STEM group, and we had a meeting this morning, and I said I had to actually leave to go talk to Liz, and who established Champions of Change. And we were talking about the report that had come out. And I think what's really fascinating, if we think about transport and engineering, I don't know, there's a number of engineers in the room today. I'm looking at Benita as one of them, but there are a number of engineers in the room today. We released the statistical report last week, which is pretty sad to say. We only have 18% of women studying engineering and 16% who are working, but only 14% working as engineers. And I know, Caroline mentioned 24% of women in transport. But so you can't say we're done. We've got a long way to go. One of the observations that we've been having, though, within EA, and coming back to your role as a UN rapporteur, is that we've found that developing economies have more women studying and working in engineering, or STEM, let's just say STEM, which we need in transport, than we do in developed countries. So if you look at Australia, UK and New Zealand, we're all pretty woeful. But then if you look at India, Iran, South America, their numbers are in the 40s and the 50s percentile. Have you got any reasoning for why that's the case?
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because those countries are not known for gender equality, but they're coming up to near 50% in STEM subjects and STEM industries. I mean, when I look at that, because the decadal plan spoke to that, and you go back and ask women in those countries, part of it is that those jobs, STEM jobs, actually can deliver some kind of good income in those countries. So that's why it attracts more women there. Whereas here in Australia, when we have our daughter, we say, you know what, you can do anything. You can be anything or whatever. And before you know it, also those that are influencing are often influencing in a way that's taking women out of male-dominated environments, because they still believe there's risk in those environments. And indeed, our work shows that there is still risk. So I think what we need to do is work with influencers to help parents and others see, but most importantly, help young women see that being part of this amazing future, whether it's in transport, whether it's in technology, AI or whatever, that will require STEM skills. To step into it. I'm just thinking as I'm saying that, I've got a son and a daughter. My daughter came home at year 9. She said, look, Mum, I've thought about the subjects and, I'm not going to do maths. I went, stop. No daughter of mine is not doing maths. They said, you will do maths. The only question is what level maths you'll do. My son, he would have been shot on the way out of the school if he'd said he wasn't doing maths. So I think that kind of needs to shift.
That's a fact in Australia. Coming back to transport and attracting more women into transport, but for those who are leaders in transport, have you got any lessons from other industries where you've seen that they've been able to increase the proportion of women in senior roles, but in all roles really in the sector?
Yeah, well, I think the property sector is a good idea, and and we got Kathy
Kathy McDermott's here, who oversaw the Property Champions of Change.
Yeah, and maybe that's it. I mean, one of the things behind Champions of Change is it's based on the philosophy that no one of us acting independently, so no CEO acting independently in a sector will ever be as good as all of us coming together. And I think that still holds true. Because for the property sector, just like every sector, you've got some who are leading and some who are laggards. And when we started Champions of Change, we started with men. And what we came to understand is when you bring a group of men together, particularly where they're peers as CEOs, they all want to be better than the other one. So, someone will come in and say, oh, look, we just gave our women, 16 weeks paid parental leave. Oh, well, what type of loser are you? We gave 20 weeks and we gave 24. And before you know it, it's all trending upwards. So I think we learnt that when you bring peers together, also to problem solve in safe spaces. And we have, and Ron, because you've been involved, in Kathy, that there is no wrong question. Gender equality is hugely complex. It's an adaptive challenge. There's no technical fix. And in that environment, we need a psychologically safe environment for men and all of us actually to learn about what's effective in driving gender equality and what isn't. So that's what Champions of Change does. And that's an exciting possibility. We're thinking about a Champions of Change transport group and starting with rail, because we've got some beautiful male leaders in the rail sector already stepping up, and they want others to join them, because when enough leaders step up, the sector will lift as well, and that's what you've found in property. Just to give you one example of that, as on the 25th of November, we call it the International Day of Ending Violence Against Women. Every property owner in this city anyway, and I think probably in other states, they'll light up all their buildings in purple to just call out again the unacceptability of violence against women, and every one of them will be taking strong action to recognise domestic violence as a workplace issue. Now, we are leading the world in that. That's what I found out from my UN work. There is no other country that is actually doing as much in the private sector to recognise this issue as a workplace issue. Safe at home, safe at work. We see it all on one continuum. And I think it's the Champions of Change and other groups that actually have been quite influential in doing that.
In a few minutes, I'm going to be asking from questions from the floor, so there will be roving mics, so get ready to ask your question. And I just want to back up the comment you just made about we are leading. I'm the federal government's private sector representative in G20 Empower, right. And I was in India earlier in the year. So firstly, yes, 40% of women study engineering in India, and part of the reason is career progression and independence. Yeah. So that was you picked up on that one. The other thing that was really fascinating is when you're with all these women globally from G20 countries, not Russia wasn't there, was that we are leading, and I think we need to shout out the great things we're doing, because I think sometimes we focus on the challenges, and we should really embrace, WGEA, Chief Executive Women, Champions of Change, and whenever I was on a panel, I could rattle off all these initiatives, and the key ingredient to all of that is collaboration. So why do you think it's so different that we've taken this approach in Australia, and have you seen that in other countries? And what can National Women in Transport learn from that?
Yeah, well, I think, in countries that are doing it well, and if you look at some of the Scandinavian countries around gender equality, what are they doing well? They're building it into the education system. So I think, and Australia's starting to do that as well. They have a vibrant civil society, all the women's NGOs, National Women in Transport and whatever, and they get out and they collaborate with each other. They realise that this is a shared challenge, so we need to step up. So I think that would be one thing. The other thing, I think, for women in transport is, you know, you can be so much stronger when you partner with others. So to think strategically about your partnerships as well. But the other thing I'd say is men are just so critical to this change. I mean, you know, when I started Champions of Change, when I stepped up as a Sex Discrimination Commissioner, I just thought, well, you know, we women, we're going to have this sorted. Now, I'm just going to open we used to call them Rolodexes, that place. I'm going to ring Rom and I'm going to ring all the fantastic women I know, and we're going to get it sorted. But after about a year and a half, I went, oh, geez, this strategy's not working too well. And started to understand that gender equality is about the redistribution of power, whether it's in a family or a workplace or a nation. So if we want to redistribute power, we need to work with those who hold the levers of power. And in pretty much every country in the world today, it's not exclusively, but it is largely men. So if we want to change this picture, we need to work with, you know, good, decent men who want to step up with us. And that's when I started to say, okay, well, if that's the case, I better ring some of these men. So I still remember I rang Glenn Boren, beautiful man. He was the head of IBM in this region, and I knew he had twins, just like you, Carolyn. I'd done the research. I knew he had a boy and a girl, and I thought, oh, he's got to be a sitting target for me. So I'm ringing him on the phone, never met him before. Hello, you don't know me, but this is who I am. And did you know, and then I talked him through all the gender inequality. And then I finished with my punchline, which was, unless, you know, powerful, decent men like you step up and change this picture, your daughter will never have the same opportunities as her twin brother, all because she was born a girl. And he went, oh my God, oh, that's not right. No, you're right, it's not right. So what are we going to do about it? And then we got the first 5. And that's what I also found out, that when you get good men on board, then other men want to join in. And we took it away from there. So I think, you know, men's involvement is just so critical. And in fact, just a couple of weeks before I stepped down from the UN, our mandate is the first global mandate to ever step up and do a global position paper or thematic report on moving men from just being engaged to equal accountability. So there will now be a normative framework across the world which really will be about men's accountability for gender equality as well. So that's quite exciting.
Yep. Fantastic. Questions from the floor? While you're all thinking, I've got another one. So my beautiful niece is here today, and she's in her mid-20s. And Caroline...
love your aunt.
I know.
So embarrassing.
So Kat's mid-20s. What would you say now, looking back to your mid-20 self?
Looking back to my mid-20 self, I'd probably say, you know, don't be so stressed, anxious about, you know, just about your career, about, you know, about the future. I mean, I think, and I'm just trying to remember, but I think you sit here and you think, oh my God, I could never be like that person because I'm just, you know, me here in this moment. But every one of us, we're not in any way extraordinary. We're just ordinary people who are following what we like to do and lifting others up with us. So my main piece of advice is that I believe when you connect with people on a human level, so it doesn't matter whether it's the chair of a board of BHP or indeed anywhere else, we're all breathing the same air, we're all sharing the same space, the same planet. We're deeply connected as human beings. So my advice always is just treat people as humans first, and then whatever happens later will. So don't be too anxious about having to climb that ladder and whatever. Yeah.
Beautiful. Erin.
Hi, I'm Erin Flaherty, the Chair of National Intermodal. I've sort of got a really fundamental question, I suppose, because when I was growing up, what was expected, I suppose, was to do well at school and to do something that would, you know, as a woman, give you an income, you know, so if things happened where you had to support yourself, you know, it was still within that sort of male, the patriarchy, but it was sort of an aspirational journey, I suppose. And I talk to my nieces now, and they're much more interested in what the celebrities are doing. They're much more interested in the Kardashians, and, you know, and I just wonder if sort of social media and the celebrity has really been a big disservice to our women. You know, we've sort of lost the way, I think, in that aspirational journey, and who is important to society.
Yeah, I suppose having strong role models is really important, as you say. And I do worry about the impact of social media. I mean, I've got a daughter and a son as well. But I just wonder, I mean, I agree with you. Economic independence is absolutely critical. You know, if you don't have economic independence as a woman, you don't have power over your own life, and we don't know what's going to happen there. But yeah, the impact of influences, so other people setting our identities rather than we setting our own identities, I think, yeah, that is an absolute challenge. I'm not sure what the way through it is, except could we invent a feminist internet? One that is deeply respectful of everyone, but particularly women, one that doesn't show any violence against women, one that shows women of all shapes and sizes and everything else and equally applauds them, one that has developers who are creating the codes and the AI algorithms that are women, so that, you know, in a sense, what worries me is that in the future, women's needs, women's aspirations, whatever, will be written out of our future if we don't have more women in STEM and technology and everything else.
Maybe we need an influencer who's a professor of mathematics, you know, as opposed to
Yeah, we need all
a
kinds.
television
Scientist,
star.
the woman, Kathy
Yeah,
Foley.
she's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just to pick up that point, though, the word for 2023 is actually Matildas.
Yeah.
And I think the point that I'm trying to make is they were amazing role models. And when you look at, they're not the only female sporting team or female athlete. And I think the more we can move to women, you know, the good news stories from social media, not just the influencers. I think there are some, and try and, you know, make sure our daughters and sons are looking at the great influencers. It would go some way, but sadly, I know that in talking to my daughter, she grew up with all of you, so she's incredibly feisty because she doesn't know what, you know,
Not big feisty
yeah,
like.
yeah. If she's, but what she did say, she went to a regional university, and she said, "Mum, you're one of the only mothers who work." And two, the influence of mothers is quite critical. So I'm going to flick to you on that in a minute. The influence of mothers is quite critical, and so these all the girls. So she was living with 8 other girls in her residence, and she said they just didn't have the role model and the influencing, and the only thing they knew about it was stories she told of me and all, you know, my Nikki and all of the women in the room who know my daughter, and so really, how can we amplify that or support not just mothers, but caregivers and parents to be a positive influence?
Yeah, that's right. And just as you were talking there, I was thinking about our, you know, country mission into Afghanistan. I mean, one of the real problems of girls not being educated in Afghanistan is that in a couple of generations, we'll just think all women are dumb, because that's what will happen if women aren't allowed an education. Well, no one would think that women were smart. So I think, the aspirations that we set for our children, I mean, you don't have to care about gender equality for this. If you have a family which is more gender equal, you're more economic resilient, because COVID comes along and dad loses his job, but it's okay because mum's still working, so we won't be in poverty. There's so many different reasons. So, but if you're not seeing, you know, powerful women, and I'm not negative implications of power, but really positive, you know, compassionate, authentic, talented women in your own circle, then we need great visibility elsewhere. And maybe I'm a young girl and I'm thinking, oh, could I go into transport or whatever? I'm reading the newspaper about transport stories. I never see any women. So why would I think I could be in there? So that's why I think, once again, building up organisations like National Women in Transport and whatever that are there when I'm not seeing it in my own family is really positive as well. And maybe it's also for us, you know, as, you know, people who are powerful because we're in this room, to lift up others. And I'm thinking migrant women. We do a lot of work with migrant women across the world, and they have particular, you know, additional difficulties. So to support them, to put them forward, to sponsor them and whatever, I think is a good idea as well.
Thank you. Question from here.
Hi, Rebecca Want from the market leader for transport in GHD and also the chair of Women in Rail Committee.
Yeah, good.
It's a great gathering today. Lots of women in rail and everyone working in transport, so thank you. You spoke about the positive difference of the Champion in Change or Change program in the property sector, and that there is some lovely work moving forward potentially on a women in rail for Champions of Change. What can we hope for if we do get a coalition of the willing for the Champions of Change rail chapter or transport?
Yeah, no, that'd be fantastic, because the great thing about becoming a new group at the minute is you can leverage off the 12 years of previous work, because as I said, when we got the first 5 on board, it was a bit like running group therapy. Oh my God, we tried this and that didn't work, and then this one didn't work, and then that one didn't. So we came out of that phase about a year into it and started taking some different actions, because there is no silver bullet here. We're experimenting, we're holding it in an experimental mindset. So the great thing is now we're getting a much better idea about what works and what doesn't. And I think that's the great opportunity for CEOs in the rail and transport sector more generally, is that they can learn from each other, they can learn from the 12 years of history about what works and what doesn't work, and we can accelerate up the curve. And one of the beautiful things about transport is that safety is a core value in transport organisations. And from my work in mining companies like Rio Tinto and others, what I've come to understand is that you can use the physical safety infrastructure for psychosocial risk, particularly around building culture where women can thrive because we're embedding everyday respect. So I think that's an opportunity for transport companies. There are many of the Champions of Change members who are doing that, and they're doing some amazing things. Just to give you one example of that, Rio Tinto, they have their red alert system. I don't know whether transport companies have this, but if I get injured on site and say I lose my hand, that's a red alert. So within 24 hours, a banner will go out to all the operations around the world, of which there are many, and it'll say, what happened? Well, one of our team members had her hand cut off by this machine. What did we learn? That we're not maintaining the machines properly, and we need to shift that. What's going to change? Well, we're getting rid of those machines, or we're increasing the maintenance schedule, or whatever it is. So that's been highly successful as a strategy. So what they've started to do is do their purple banners. So the purple banners are the everyday respect. So a couple of months ago, a purple banner went out and it said, what happened? Well, one of our women in our team was followed back to her accommodation by a group of men who were catcalling and leering. What did we learn? Well, we learned that this is an example of sexual harassment, everyday disrespect, and it goes against every value that we hold dear here at Rio Tinto. What happened? Well, those men are no longer on our site. So it's once again just reinforcing, but it's using infrastructure that everyone knows and understands, and moving it across to psychosocial risk. And I think there's some of the opportunities that we could really explore within the transport sector as well.
The other thing I'd say, we learned a valuable lesson in the early days of property. After they'd been together for some months, there was that's the lunch. There was an infamous lunch, and all the champions got up on the and there was 1,000 people in the room, and I was on the table with EY who'd done the report, and you couldn't have written this. Anyway, I'll just give you 2 examples for how bad it was. And so we had a wonderful female friend of ours who was the moderator, and all of them had to get together and do unconscious bias training and separate the males and the females. And one of the agents said, "Oh, well, we don't have enough female leaders, so we didn't do that. We just did the males." But I didn't go to the unconscious bias training because I was away on a golf weekend with the boys. And then the moderator said, "What are some of the things that women can think about to help with their careers?" Well, they've just got to learn to play golf. And they've got to come to the pub on Friday afternoon. And it's worse. So I'm just giving you a really big snippet. Bob Johnson, who was the head of GPT, literally leant forward and said, "Now I understand," in front of 1,000 people, "now I understand why you don't have any female leaders working for you." Now, the gentleman who made those comments was removed from his role within weeks of saying those comments. But the really good thing about all of this is Ken Morrison, who was the CEO at the time and a friend of Kathy was working to him, and Mark Stein at the head of Stockland, who was the chair, and they were instrumental in Champions of Change, said, there's a line in the sand. Like, we now have a line in the sand, and we can't hide the fact that it's really bad because it was all up there on stage in front of everyone. And we all talked about it for years, like now. And so they actually said it was actually a really good thing because it fast-tracked. It was so bad and so embarrassing for the industry. It fast-tracked change quite quickly because it really just, you couldn't hide from how bad it was. So everyone talks about the lunch, the infamous lunch at the Western. But that's one of the things is also don't be afraid of what you unpack when you create champions of changes. And we talked about something today at STEM as well. And you sometimes you'll feel like you're going forward and then you'll feel like you're going back, but that's okay because you are still going forward. So we've got one more question, if there's one more question. Yes.
Okay, I'll be
Claire,
quick.
Gardner
Claire.
Barnes, last question.
Thanks,
Pressure's on.
Elizabeth and Romilly. I just want to go back to the geopolitical climate that we're in at the moment, because when I read about what's going on, it's quite scary. And I think about what you just said about the line in the sand. With Australia heading in a different direction, delightfully, and demonstrating its leadership capability in this space, how do we think about the scenario of us slipping back, where so many other countries are starting to do that and it's becoming a global phenomena? So how do we continue to hold the line with groups like this to ensure the momentum doesn't shift and we keep moving forward?
I think it's such a great question, because if we just do nothing, we will regress. If we if we continue just to advocate with existing strategies, we'll probably just hold the line. We might move forward a little bit. But I think what we need to do is we need to emotionally engage with this agenda. And I think when you have emotional attachment as well as a head, so head and heart attachment, then you're more likely to take intentional and strong action. And I just wanted, actually, in closing, I'll just read just a letter that a guy, well, I'll tell you about it in a minute, but basically we do purposeful storytelling within organisations to really keep strong engagement on these issues, and particularly on the issue of respectful culture. So what we do is we often bring an individual who has suffered human harm because of a culture of an organisation, we bring them directly to the most powerful person, often the CEO in the organisation. And we get the CEO to engage with this person on a deeply human level, which comes back to this importance of shared humanity. So in this example, I came across, actually it was a man, not a woman, in an organisation we were in, who had been relentlessly bullied over at least a year. And he'd tried to reach out. He'd gone to HR, he'd gone to this one, he'd gone to that one. No one was able to do anything, and he was suffering quite severe mental health impacts. So when we did purposeful storytelling, we usually do it off-site. We infuse a lot of feminine energy, set it up with flowers and everything else, and allow him the space to tell his story. When he started telling his story, he said, "Would you mind if I read a letter that my daughter wrote to me on Father's Day last year?" And he brought out this letter, and I've got his daughter's permission to read it, because I love this, because it speaks to just the power of a human condition to bring us together, and particularly around issues also like gender equality. But this is a letter. It's entitled, "I love you, always and forever. Love, Isabella. Dear Daddy, oh my God, where do I begin? You're my knight in shining armour. You're the joy to my life and the love in my life. I don't think that in all my 15 years of being alive, I've ever met anyone as brave as you. I know that life's been really tough lately, and some very bad and sad things have happened to you at work. But what you need to know is that I'm always here for you, and we'll always get through this together. I remember when I was younger, we'd go to the beach and we'd let those big waves crash up against us. They were so powerful, but not as powerful as you. I would be scared, but before those waves would reach me, you would scoop me up into your arms, the place where I was always safe. Dad, that was a day I realised you would always protect me, and the day I realised that I would always protect you." So I think
you
we
so
need to
much.
bring it down to the human level, and that will, incentivise us that this is just, we're not going to say no. This is so worth stepping up for, and that'll keep us moving forward.
Lovely way to end, and I feel like I'm a little bit teary. So please join with me in thanking Elizabeth. What a fabulous conversation.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth and Romilly. That was such a privilege to be able to listen to you both, and I'm sure everyone in this room feels the same. So that ends today's formalities. We'll have some lunch now if you're welcome to stay. And please don't forget, we've got that vision board at the back. It'd really be nice to see some post-it notes up there if you get a chance. So thank you all so much again, and yeah, what a great event. Thank you so much.